Amen. Thank you. Well, it has begun, where this class has ceased to be a collection of individuals and is now beginning to have its own personality, and groups are beginning to form within the class. I'm watching with great interest as there's about 2 of you that I'm really struggling with your name still. So I'm watching. Zane is one. I'm trying to get your name with your face. And what? Shane. Yeah, Shane, Zane, whatever. Thank you, Shane. See what I mean? But there's like 2 or 3 of you that I'm still wrestling with. The rest of you I'm starting to recognize, and so I'm watching like where you're sitting, and some of you are moving. It was kind of interesting. Elizabeth over here is laying her head, on your shoulders, like consoling one. And did you know each other 5 weeks ago?
We each other 2 weeks before, but only through Facebook.
So, but now you're like. You're getting fairly close from all the time you spent in the hospital together. So this is interesting. Yeah. And I'm not sure. There might be some guys sitting next to girls that weren't happening earlier. I don't know. But your projects are part of that. And I'm interested if there's any reflection you want to make on your project, anything that just these aha moments that were helpful to you. Oh, so this was a directional issue for you, not actually a textual issue. Well, that's still a helpful lesson as well. Anything where you're reading it, you just go, that kind of took me by surprise. I'm interested in that. Anyone want to share? I mean, you don't have to share. I'm just interested if you want to. Yeah.
Yeah, there were parts of it when it went from they did this to we did this. And then
they to we?
That maybe possibly Luke was with that group then at that point.
Yep, that's it.
It was weird because it kept on going from they to we to they to us.
And when you get a little more introduced to Luke, a little bit more familiar with him, you realize how precise he is with meticulous details like pronouns, they, we. He was there at those times. And then he said, okay, where was he? And how long was he at this place? And that gets real interesting. Yeah, thank you, Miss Weiss.
I thought it was interesting that the 3 different times he recounted his Damascus experience, they were all different. They were a little bit, one was more brief, or one was, when he was under persecution, he did it really quick, almost like to convince them before they, beat him up or whatever, I thought that was interesting.
So, Steve, why do you think Paul's 3 accounts of his conversion differ?
Probably because of his audience.
I think you've nailed it. See, you are entering into scholarship, where you don't just read the text, but you then begin to ask interesting questions about the text. Why does he repeat this 3 times? By the way, there's only 3 things that Paul repeats 3 times. I'm sorry, 3 things that Luke repeats 3 times. One is Saul's conversion. The other is Cornelius' conversion. And the other is a letter written to the Gentiles in Acts 15. What do all 3 of these have to do with one another? They're all about Gentile salvation. Yeah, and what is Luke?
Gentile.
Yeah, he is one. So we had another hand up here somewhere. Want to make a comment?
I noticed that towards the beginning book of Acts, there were a lot of salvations, everybody being saved rapidly. But as the book furthered on, it became more about strengthening and helping each other out as opposed to...
No, that's interesting. So one of the issues is early on, we get people saved, and then after we've got these churches established, how do we strengthen the churches? Yeah, very good. Mm-hmm.
There was a passage in Acts chapter 5 when the apostles were before the Pharisees, and there was a Pharisee that stood up, and it seemed like he was defending him, Gamaliel, and we were questioning his salvation. It's kind of like, was he a believer maybe?
Yeah, questioning whether Gamaliel might in fact have been saved. He was one of the most prominent rabbis of the first century. And it was interesting, we'll get there in chapter 5, but the great-grandson of Gamaliel, this Gamaliel, introduced the 18th benediction into the Jewish liturgy of the synagogue, which said, this was one of the prayers that they said at their synagogue services, may the Nazarenes and heretics perish as in a moment. So if his great-grandfather was a believer, his great-grandson took exactly the opposite tact and wanted to excommunicate all of the Christian followers, the Nazarenes and heretics, out of the synagogue. Well, very good. I'm glad that you had that experience. There's another thing happening that I really, really like, and that is Tiffany came up to me before class and while I was taking roll and just says, you know, we're getting a study group together tonight to study the book of study for the test tomorrow, and just wondered if last year's was going to be the same kind of material as this year. The answer is yes. Really, if you want to look at someone's test from last year, and I don't want you going and collecting previous tests. You don't need to do that. But if someone has a test from last year, I will rewrite it this year. So if you just use someone's test from last year, that's okay. I don't want you archiving stuff. But I would say, you know, if you want to just see like what was online, I gave you one online last test. I don't need to do that again. But even more helpful than looking at last year's test, because this year's will be different, look at the text itself. Okay, like read actually chapter 2, because that's what will be on the test. You need to know the text inside and out. And I know that this is rather bald data. Know the text, know the text. And I do want you to know about the text, but before you can know about the text, you need to know data. And I just want to give you a little bit of my heart for pedagogy here. You guys are freshmen. And I don't assume, and some of you this is not true, but I don't assume that any of you actually had a teacher that forced you to know data. It's like, how do you feel about this? You know, I don't care how you feel about it right now. I want you to know the data. Your opinions have zero authenticity without data and facts to back them up. Okay? So I want you to learn at the freshman year how to know the data. And we're going to start pushing you into observations like Steve has made over here of why might he have recorded this 3 times. But for right now, I would be just pleased as punch if you just knew stuff, if you just had some facts at your disposal. Okay? So with that in mind, let's get to Acts chapter 2. We are at verse 38. Actually, we're finished with verse 38 and 39. We're now at verse 40. And I'm going to breeze through this quickly so that we can have a good bulk of time to talk about the doctrine of baptism. So while you're at verse 40 of Acts 2, you might also want to be at page 74 of your notebook, because we're going to plow through that in a minute.